Nice to see you all.
Exactly. So I think we're recording now. I'm going to present. So we're going to kind of move on, get on with it a bit, because as I said, there's something else happening in the Apple world at the minute at 6 o'clock. So we're going to get moving. So people are going to join as we go. Let's see, share my screen. So guys, hopefully, I know Jürgen and Joe are there. You might let people in, maybe if I don't catch them into this meetup. We're going to get started. As I said, we're recording this. So I don't know, guys, can you let people in there? Is that possible?
Yeah, I'll take care of it.
Okay, cool. Okay. I don't know what that's doing. All right. So welcome, guys, to our next meetup of the Open Developer Group in a very weird year. So if you guys want to get contact with the group, we do most of our contact on Twitter at DublinSF_devs. And also, of course, most of you guys are getting us through the trailblazercommunitygroups.com website. So just a couple of things. I'm borrowing some slides here from my friend Jürgen, who had a session, had a couple of sessions where just because it's virtual, a couple of things. If you want to mute yourself, it'd be great. If you find connection bad, turn your webcam off. And we're going to have some Q&A with René later on. But if you do want to flag something, it's pretty casual here. Just ask a question and we will try to get to you. I am currently talking to some people about getting some more sessions organized with different members of the community. But tonight, Stephen, I've René, who I've asked at Dreamforce last year, would he chat to us? And with the way 2020 went, I'm delighted he's with us this evening. I'll introduce René in a second. Most of you probably last weekend saw your sandbox has been refreshed with the 21 release, so that's officially happening next month. And Dreamforce, of course, is a more virtual event this year, but we are going to have our usual after Dreamforce event. But I will need volunteers because no one's going to be in San Francisco this year, unfortunately, although René, maybe you are. Unfortunately, we won't be, but we're going to be following it online. So if anyone does have anything they'd like to present on afterwards, something they saw was interesting, even something very casual presentation, just let me know. I'll certainly be online over the Dreamforce period. A couple of groups to keep an eye out in the Dublin area. Jürgen is doing great work with the administrator group. Connor and Tricia obviously doing fantastic work with their groups as well. Keep an eye out for them. I just want to briefly highlight two groups doing great work. Jürgen's administrator group have had a number of meetups in the last few months. They're all on YouTube. So if you look at their YouTube channel, you can subscribe to them and get the latest stuff. We're recording all this, and this meetup's getting recorded to our own YouTube channel, which I'll send out by Twitter. The other group just to keep an eye on is the Letterkenny group, who are doing fantastic work. They've had a really good number of sessions on Lightning Web Components, which I think René is going to talk about today. And had a fantastic session with Peter Chittum a little while ago on Lightning Message Service. So they're all recorded if you want to grab those. So when it comes then to our host, our presenter this evening, René, if I can find the right slide. So René is someone who's been, people in Blue Wave have known for a long time through another type of work. But René is an architect for developer evangelism in Salesforce. He is probably better known when you see him at various presentations, steering and wearing city outfits. But René does a huge amount of work in the community as well. He's blogs extensively in the Salesforce developers blog on most releases, especially on things like Salesforce DX and like web components. So René, I'm going to hand over to you, René, and you can present if that's okay, and let you take over. Can you present there, René? Can you?
I will definitely do that. So thanks first for the introduction. Thank you very much for having me all here. It's virtual these days. I miss it to travel around and to meet other people physically. So at least that helps me a bit to connect at least to the community. And I like it that you put in the blogs, because that's reminded me that I have like a couple of them drafted but not finished yet. So just put your thumb in that, right? It's like there you need to deliver more. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about Lightning Web Components. And that's for various reasons. I think the most important reason is just like I really like this technology because it enables me as a developer to really build fast, really good UIs. And as a German, I'm usually more good in functionality and not UX. But it allows me really to develop fast. And this as well as off-platform and on-platform. So really purely on Salesforce, but also when I build, an app for on Heroku or AWS or GCP, right? Just doesn't matter. I can use the same stack actually to build my user interfaces. And I think that's this hybrid approach is, these days, well, I would say even the last years, super important, right? You just want to build reusable elements that based on your company's or customer needs, you can use either on platform A, like the Salesforce platform, or if you want to run parts of the same user interface on another platform, you can do that too. Now, and I want to dig into some of the elements that are, I would say, lesser known in the area when you do that with Lightning Web Components, LWC. And plus, if we have some time, based on the element that Barry mentioned, I would like to talk a bit about performance benchmarking and also accessibility testing for LWC. That's more a sneak peek for a couple of things that some in the team are working on, and we will have some super cool content around in the really near future. Sounds good? No responses? That's great. Everyone on mute. That was a double check.
Excellent. Cool. Sure, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so what you see here on my screen, I won't look directly in the camera, so it will be a bit weird. So what you see here on my screen is just a Lightning Web Component app, like a Bootstrap app using the Create LWC app CLI, which I built, I think, for TDX last year, which allows you to run LWC projects off platform, like in this case locally on my machine, but it can be on every vendor that runs a Node.js application, basically. Now, why I'm doing this and why I don't show that in org is because I use this actually often for fast prototyping. I think there was recently some discussion going on around the playground, and I would say, this is how I develop everything that I build, either for on or for off platform, right? It's really adapted the way that I work with that. Sometimes in conjunction, for sure, with our local development, which is also available just for pure on-platform development. Now, what I'm going to show you is one hidden gem, in my opinion, around LWC for off-platform, and that is module resolution. So let me go to Visual Studio Code. If you ever develop with that, it looks, just like a standard Node.js project, and a couple of elements are especially the same as you would develop on Salesforce. So I think the zoom doesn't work. Just gonna make it a bit bigger. So what you see here is my module structure, and you see here my as the parent folder and app and greeting. This is kind of a reference of what when you develop on Salesforce, or what you would have beside under the LWC folder, right? So that represents the namespace of your components. So my app and on Salesforce is actually C, and then the name of your module. Now, this tooling is for on-platform totally transparent for you. So when you deploy your Lightning Web Components to an org, the mechanics in the org just do all the module resolution for you. So if you say, hey, I'm going to deploy 3 Lightning Web Components, and maybe I forget a public property, you will get a metadata error using the CLI, right? You will see the error directly because we do the module resolution during deployment. Now, off-platform is a bit different. Off-platform, we're using actually the same mechanics, but you have the power to configure that. So how do we do this? When you go to the root of a project, you will have usually a file which is called Lwc Config Json. And this is the location that allows you to specify where your modules actually reside within this project. Now, we saw that I had a directory, source modules. Fine, right? But it also means if you want to split up your directory structure because you want to have, your own corporate requirements, you can have, and this is different compared to what you would build on Salesforce, is you can have just another folder, right? I could have temp my modules, right? It just doesn't matter. You can just, point it where you want. Now, the fun part comes now, is this can also be, if you want, for example, to reference to, going folder down and say my DX project, right? And say force app main default, for example, right? It just doesn't matter. You can even develop the same and potentially, to some extent, reuse the same components that you would use in a standard DX project. To some extent is, we have some things on platform like Apex or like wire calls, right? Or a record API that just don't exist yet for off-platform. But there will be often shared UI elements, if you have your own buttons, your own cards, your own accordion, or you have your own component that just, displays a chart or so. You can easily just reference that. And just by putting this module record definition within the Lwc Config Json file, the Lwc OSS project is able to resolve it, just no matter where you build it, which I think is like super cool, right? Now that may be, interesting, but you usually don't have all modules on your local machine, right? If you work with a bigger team, we actually want to distribute them. And I would say the mechanic these days is having an npm package for that, right? I think, probably some of you already built some. If you're using a standard node project, you will use Prettier, use Lint, and one of those, I think, I don't know, 1.5, 2 million npm packages these days. It's just a standard distribution mechanism for these projects. Now the modules definition allows you also to consume that, to build your own reusable packages that you can distribute, but also consume using npm. So I'm here in another project. This is just also an Lwc project. And you see here on the left that I have a couple of UI components, button, card, input, things that may look similar, maybe from, the base components on Salesforce, but just, shared UI components that I want to share across different projects. And I've called this, super awesome, not so long name, Lwc recipes OSS UI components, because I think that was like the longest German version for a package name that you can find. Now, what I can do now in my OSS project, I can, quickly open a terminal. It takes us a couple of seconds and say yarn add and say Lwc recipes OSS UI components. I have no idea why it took such a long name. Which then just downloads and install this package with my components within my local project. Well, that's it, right? There's nothing more. I just really installed a standard package with some components. So when I go back and would restart my server, would it know that it exists? I would say no, because similar to the modules for the directories, we would have to tell Lwc, the module resolver mechanism, where to find these npm modules. And lucky us, it's pretty simple. We just say, okay, we have an npm package, and it's called Lwc recipes OSS UI components. And with that, the module resolution mechanism knows automatically, oh, when René is going to reference a template file, a template markup, and I can't find it, for example, in my source modules folder, let's go into this npm package and try to resolve there. So let's quickly try it out. I'm gonna restart that. Local server is up and running. And I'm going to use just app.html. So this is like, this nice sample page that my colleague Kevin Hill assembled some time ago. And I will just remove everything from this project, which will then refresh the page. So clean plate. Now what I want to do now is I want to actually say, I have my own UI card. It looks really, I took these examples because they're really similar for on the platform. And I say title is Dublin. Let's go save. and you see my card appear, right? Pretty simple, pretty simple. Now, the cool mechanics with that is actually I can really now share my UI code. And when you think a step further, it's not only, this is an LWC OSS project, but in pure theory and practically, you can also install an npm package into a DX project, right? So if you have your components and you would bundle your metadata with an npm package, you can easily distribute those components using npm just within your project, right? Which I think is like super cool. I think that's super underestimated, this capability of building and reusing this. Now, there are a couple of components in there. When I go back to my project, I see like button, card, input, nav footer, and select. Now, you may have a library of 5, 15, 50, 100 components, but you don't want to share them all, right? Because some are maybe only internal. For example, when we look at a lightning card, that's a lightning card, but inside it has a button and it has a special, let's say, lightning card icon and the lightning card header, and you don't want to expose all these things. Now, when you work with the LWC module resolution, you have to be really explicit what others can consume from your package. So when I go into this project and go, in this case, my package JSON, because that's where I defined it, I really have to say, okay, I only want to expose these components, right? Even if there are 100 in there, 1,000, everyone who is going to consume that in their package can only access these, right? Which is an explicit controlling mechanism. We can discuss if it makes sense if you have a package with 150 components you want to distribute actually, because that's a lot of maintenance. But at the same time, for example, if the UI button would have a UI button icon, but you don't want to expose that to someone because it's an internal implementation detail of your UI button component, this is the way that you can control that. Okay, this is number 2. Now, number 3 is actually, I think, one of the most exciting options on how you can use a module resolution. So let me quickly get familiar with the screen. I mentioned before that when you develop with LWC on platform and you want to reuse stuff off platform, you often have like tight integration with Salesforce. And I think one of the most common integrations is that you call an Apex class, right? Besides having the record API that you can use with the add-y adapter. Now, you can't just copy or reuse the same JavaScript code that calls an Apex method from on platform and just copy that over to an off platform project and just reuse the component, right? Barry, no. Barry, you said that way. I said no, right? Actually, to some extent, you can. I'm not saying that you can get the Apex call, but you can reuse the same component. I want to show you how. So let's imagine we have our app HTML in here, and we're going to add something like, I'm off platform, right? I'm off platform. The import some fun method, let's say from Salesforce Apex, my class, some fun method. Okay. That, I guess, will never work because we're not connected to an org, right? I think when we would have such an Apex class in our org, we can copy that over, it would totally resolve. For off-platform, I'm not sure yet. So let's see. No, we just doing this a bit further. We say like, let's say we have a class property which is called Apex data, and on connected callback. So basically, when the component gets connected to the DOM, we just want to call some fun method. So let's assume it would be imperative Apex. So promise. So some fun method, and let's say then result. We just do something like this: Apex data equals result. And let's assume we will have an error. I hope that we won't have, but that's fine. And as good developers, we just log in there to the console and give the user no proper error message, right? But this is like pretty much on how you would have like imperative Apex for on platform. Now I can show you now, and I will show you now on how you can actually mimic the Apex call, even if we wouldn't call Apex, but for example, a custom API endpoint, and doing the exact same thing. You wouldn't have to change the actual code in your Lightning Web Component to have this Apex method executed. So the next thing that I want to do is actually I go back to my modules folder, and let's say I'm going to create a new folder. Let's call it Hacky. Okay, Hacky sounds good. And in Hacky, I create don't read it in Finder. I create another folder which I can call Apex. Doesn't matter. And I create an index.js file. I think index.js file, has like really nothing to do with Apex. So the only thing I want to do is actually I want to create a promise for that, so that we have our promise. Just a dumb thing. It can be everything. It can be calling to an API or whatever you would need for that. And I'm just going to return something that has a similar shape as actually an imperative Apex call. Let's say name, my record, and whatever experience equals great. I don't know, Germans are not creative. The only thing that it actually is now, I have a local index.js file that is a module with the namespace Hacky and the module name Apex, which returns the then of a promise, which is similar like the data shape of an Apex call. The only thing that I have to do now is I have to tell my module resolver in my Lwc Config Json file that it should resolve to this file, right? So let me quickly go back. I go to my Lwc Config Json. We still have our npm package in here, right? So this is great. And now the only thing that we'll do is I will add another module, right? So I say name, and let me be a bit lazy. I'm just gonna copy that. And we're telling them, okay, if you find this name as a module in the JavaScript file, then resolve it, please, to this path. And the only thing we have to do now is we can say source modules Hacky Apex index.js. And that's the only thing you have to do. So, and this doesn't not only apply to this, invoking the Apex method. This applies basically to everything that you import within a Lightning Web Component. So you can basically mimic or have your own get record UI API or your own Salesforce label in there, right? I'm not saying that you should reinvent the wheel and rebuild all the functionality, but if it really helps you to, it's a good mechanism. No, sorry, one of my kids tries to move my table. Yeah, that's working from home.
Junior Apex developer.
I think he's. I fear he's more Python. So we'll see. Right.
All right. Okay.
So yeah. So but this allows you really to mimic, to alias basically every module name that you can find. Right. And I use it kind of frequently when I have some modules that I want to share between projects. I just have a REST API or something else, transform that to the shape that I expect, and I can do the same stuff with an Apex class actually, right? And really share the components between an off-platform project and an on-platform project, which I think is really super cool. Steht mal hier oben drauf. Just sitting there. Okay. I just hope that he doesn't move the table. So this is like a real super cool mechanism. It's like available since, I guess, 4 or 5 months. So I would really I really recommend that you look into that. There will be soon a blog post about that. It goes a bit more in detail with also some sample repository where you can even play with the same thing, right? But once this got released, someone pointed into this opportunity. I was like, that's so cool, because usually you're copying over only the pure UI components. You have to build a data container around that, and this way you can just avoid that, right? You can just mimic that within your own project, and really like get the benefit out of that. So the other topic that I want to talk about, as long as it doesn't fall off the chair, is performance benchmarking and accessibility in LWC. So this is something that, especially performance benchmarking, is kind of near and dear to my heart. And it's a great capability, actually, that we kind of recently published for that. So when you go on the Salesforce GitHub organization, you will find a repository which is called BEST. And if you ever worked with Lightning Web Components, you may have heard the name JEST. It's just unit testing, right? And the team got inspired by that and said, okay, we want to make actually performance testing of Lightning Web Components as easy as unit testing, right? So they said, okay, here's JEST. So let's make a B for benchmark and create JEST, right? It's it's free, it's open source. We use it actually for a lot of our base Lightning components. We use it for the pure LWC framework to benchmark the performance when you change your components, right? I mean, performance is key for everything, and we will talk a bit about when and when not you should test your components, because it may be not something for every component that you have in your project. And this is also like BEST. I forgot to mention that it just takes every LWC, no matter if it's on or off platform, right? It just doesn't matter. The most important part that you have to consider is, do I really have to test my components for performance or not? I'll really give you 2 or 3 examples what really makes good tests for that or not. Now, I'm not going through the full setup. I already set a bit for that up, but I want to show you actually what it takes. I just take the same project, for example, here, to build such a benchmark test. If you ever work with JEST, which I pretty much like, because it's like super easy for doing tests, and we as developers, we test our code, right? Unit testing is important. We can agree on that, right? I don't see you all, but we just agree on that, okay? The same. So benchmarks. Just create a new folder. This is where you should place that. That's also the recommendation. And I create a new app benchmark JS file in this case. No TypeScript. I'm writing too much TypeScript these days. Okay, so it is as simple as you would write a unit test with JEST. Now, you can test pure JavaScript, and I think that's, I would say, one of the most recommended patterns that you could look at. But you can also test your Lightning Web Components. So, I'm just doing the same thing that you would do with JEST. I just want to walk you through the different elements that it would need and take to write such a performance test. So create element from LWC. We're just gonna import that. There we go. And let's say I would want to test my app component. So I'm just going to import that module. That is exactly the same as you would do that with every other component. And it's really like JEST. So we first going to describe our test case, and usually we take the name of the component under test. Right, so there we go. And a function for that. Now, what's different is now, usually with JEST, you would have a describe it block. For example, my app renders this button. My app handles the Evangelist and that stuff. Now, in this case, they added an additional handler, which is called benchmark, which is just like the name that you want to have, right? I just call it create and render usually. Creates and renders, and sometimes says stuff like whatever 100 times, right? Because the important part when you do performance benchmarking is not only you run a test, like with unit testing, you just have one run through, either it passes or fails. The reason for performance benchmarking is to say, okay, just gonna do a thing like for 100 times, 1,000 times. I would say like 100 times is fine usually, to figure out if the behavior has changed, right? So if you make huge changes in a component and you figure out it loads longer, right? So it takes this, oh, my gut feeling is everything takes longer after these changes. Performance benchmarking is where it helps you to move away from having a gut feeling that your performance decreased or increased, just to that it didn't change in best case, or the performance increased, or you had a performance degradation, right? This is really why when it comes into the play is like, when the users say after the next deployment, oh, the app behaves so slow, right? Here's the thing on how you can now monitor, even as part of your CI/CD process, if the performance goes up, down, or stays equal. Now, again, we will have to talk about what really makes sense to test. So I'm just gonna do the same thing here. Maybe given the now time to really write out. And the only thing that I will do now that will just make it a bit simple here. You just have to run the test, and it really does an iteration. Now, the iteration is not different as what you would do from a just unit test. What I just want to say is it will look a bit like duplication, because sometimes it feels like you're writing the same thing actually. Because if you have an element like in the just test, you would equally say create element, and it's like my app or namespace, and move it over and say as a constructor it is my app. And now this is the hard part where some developers, including me, would say, well, okay, just another thing that I have to write besides the core functionality of my application, right? I think this is mostly the biggest challenge. So I'm saying, maybe my element has a property. Let's just say it that way, right? And say the property, the property is now hello. And then I'm gonna append that to the DOM, because this is really the meat of the test, right? It's what's gonna happen. How does your component behave when it gets appended to the DOM, and when it gets layouted, and when it gets painted, right? So like the three, like the multiple stages, what happens on the browser? Is like their performance degradation is going well, and that may change with the number of public properties that you have on your component, because sometimes just displaying whatever, an H2 or a div, or sometimes it's doing like some complex calculations, right? Depending on the input parameters. So you may want to check out where the actual, and I would say most relevant part to test is, right? And I will tell you something. My app component here, right, which looks like this now, which has a Lightning component and a title in there, and has like little to no JavaScript in there, I would not even test that. I would not even consider to test that. And I give you the reason why. When we look at the HTML here, this is all stuff that the pure framework is doing for you. Even if you would have like 25 template ifs in there and like huge diffs and all the stuff, there's nothing you can change, right? No matter how you write your code, you can maybe even change the layout or the behavior of your component a bit, but no matter on what you would do, you would just test the pure LWC framework functionality. Is it fast to run, to render, through different template if true iterations? Is it fast to just have an iterator? Is it fast for your large table that you're building? Are the base components fast, right? Everything is out of your control anyway, right? That's what it is. Yeah, right. You only have to look at what you're really going to build. Do you have some complex JavaScript calculations? I'm currently working on a project where we have, I would say, like 50 different components, and I made a selection like, okay, I said we need performance benchmarking on these components, and then I went through every component and I looked, what are you doing, right? Are you just a couple of divs, sometimes a bit of JavaScript, 25 lines? no, it doesn't matter, right? We're talking about 2 milliseconds. But we have two bigger components in that, like really bigger components where I was like, okay, they're like key components, and they contain a lot of other components that we didn't test. So let's test this bigger component. And if we have a performance degradation in that component, then we have to dig down from the change it's coming from, right? So it's not something like, oh my gosh, we have to test everything. No, you can really look at, for example, the parent components. Sometimes you build like a thing with like 50 elements, like 50 different components, and just drop that like on a Lightning page. Maybe just run a performance test on that one, right? If it performs currently well, that's great. Just run the performance test on that, and then you will see if it goes like a couple of milliseconds up or down, that's great. If you see like an increase on 300 milliseconds after a couple of changes, then you can figure from where is it coming, right? And we have that running on a couple of projects on every pull request, right? And if that degradation by, I think the default is 5% between the previous run, so best offers you a front end and all that stuff, which is pretty great. So even with history, you can see, okay, compared to the previous run, we decrease our performance by 6%. So then you can dig down and say, okay, where it's coming from? What is the reason for that? Now, for the pure benchmark test, again, this is everything that we actually need. I ran one. No, I can run one here. Let me run one here. Run a default. So this is actually the project with the many components that I worked on. It's running now, a ton of iterations. Usually would say like 50 or 100. That's totally sufficient, but I haven't configured that yet here. And usually also what we do is, so Best has like infrastructure. So you can say, okay, I'm running an agent on a dedicated hardware if you want. And if you have like multiple projects working against that, they would all run this against the dedicated hardware somewhere in the cloud. So even not on the local machine, because this is what you want to have, right? Someone's committing something to your repo, a GitHub action or something like that, picks it up, runs the Best test, gives you this layout or this response if you want. Or what we do is use the default setting, like the default 5% decrease increase that's available, and using a GitHub app actually that comments on the pull request says, hey, you have a regression. You're going about 5%. So we are forcing people then down the route to really look into where it's coming from, right? And you're seeing here a couple of the different parameter return values that you see. We're talking about not much time in here, right? I wouldn't, don't look at the upper numbers. They are really like, okay, what time does it take to actually get all of the code together for these components, like the JavaScript, and to compile that? But time layout or paint, these are things that are spent in the browser, which I think is the most important part, because that affects every user, right? And this is like where the measures really come into the play. Now, CLI output is nice, but I think one thing that I can show here is, I think it's also publicly available. So we run this against pure Lwc, against the compiler with every change. So the team is using that since a couple of years already. So it's proven against, again, multiple frameworks, multiple repositories. And we see like, in a millisecond area, for example, like, okay, let's append 1,000 rows on a table, right? And what did this change actually do in terms of performance? And then you see, okay, how often do you append programmatically 1,000 rows to a table, right? Which is like a huge operation already, and it's a framework operation. So it's something that I would never have to test, right? I don't care about this. There are other people responsible for making the framework perform as much as possible. And they use exactly Best because that's why they build it actually for this use case, to just perform that, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, we have a couple of minutes. I think Barry want to do Q&A, FAQ after that. So one thing that I want to eventually highlight is it fits into the same bucket, and I want to give already a shout out to my colleague Alda Rivas, who's already working on that. you may already see that, because there's another cool project on the Salesforce GitHub organization, which is called, or I call it Sally, because this is how I read that as a non-native speaker. And AI11 is basically accessibility testing. And what our accessibility team did actually, they went down to a similar route as the Lwc team. They built a Jest implementation for accessibility testing, right? Which is like, super important for someone like me. I know that's important. I know maybe 10 of the most important tags that you should set on an HTML element, but I have to look it up. It's just not my area. Now, what Sally allows you, there's like, I'm not going through the full setup information, but the most important part, let me make this hopefully bigger. Can I make it bigger? There we go. Is it's really part of Jest, right? So compared to the best performance benchmarks, you can really add that to every Jest test that you want, right? Make it even part of the standard unit test. And what it does, basically, it adds the to be accessible validation to that. This is the only thing. You say, here's my element to be accessible, and what's happening, there's a kind of an industry tool which is called X for accessibility testing, and they're using that under the hood. And with this abstraction layer in Jest, they enable everyone to run full accessibility tests as part of their unit tests against an industry standard tool, which I think is like really super, super cool. Now, this is something that other reviewers will talk, I think, a lot about. Actually, she's currently preparing all of our Trailhead sample apps to be fully accessible using Sally, right? So we're rolling this out across all sample applications that we have over the next couple of weeks, ish, right? So if you look closely at those repositories, you will also already see a branch with a full implementation. And what it gives to me, and I think I have one more, yeah, that one. What it gives to me actually is a failing unit test for a modal that I built actually not so long ago that tells me, oh, a heading must not be empty, right? So something is in my JavaScript or in my mockup that makes an H2 in some state empty. It's not accessible, right? And this is important for screen readers. So this is something that, I think she will fix because she's owning this whole project, which is super cool. But it allows me actually as a component developer, no matter on platform or off platform, really serve the audience that have, impairment, that need like accessible tools, also really like fully participate actually in the application that I built, right? And this kind of gives me goosebumps because it's often sometimes underestimated how important that is because so many people are affected. And with Sally, we now have an easy way to really implement that in our everyday development workflow, right? And even say, hey, you have something that's not accessible, then it's not coming to the main branch, right? Then we're not going to deploy that. Make sure that it's really accessible. And you don't even have to be an expert so much because the tooling tells you where your errors are, which I think is even better. With that, I would say we have a couple of minutes for questions, Barry, if you want to.
We do. So if anyone has any questions, guys, for René on the stuff we talked about here, or what his plans are for Dreamforce, what wig he's going to wear, etc., guys, just take yourself off mute and have a chat.
Well, I think I'm not allowed to talk about Dreamforce, the plans.
Right, okay. Let's know.
It's always a surprise. I'm working on some other surprises which will surprise you all, but you will learn soon this year.
Good to hear.
So, and I think no wig this time for me. I have to, it's just happening. I just can't cover it any longer.
Very good. I'm not sure if anyone in the chat is asking a question, but just from my own point of view, looking at the calling of Apex from your index.js file, are you simply making a web service like REST API Apex class and just piggybacking onto the real class? Is that how you would approach that?
No. So the reason for what I showed is not to call Apex, but is to say, hey, I have a component that runs in a Salesforce org that is complex, has a ton of stuff in there, but it also has like 2 or 3 Apex classes in there, and you just want to like have these. I just don't want to rewrite that. I want to have the same functionality, right? And what you would have, and what you know, the biggest challenge, and I would say it's not even a challenge, it's just to normalize the data, right? So if my leading component is like in the Salesforce org, I can easily say, let's do a fetch, right, to whatever HTTP whatever, and then massage the data to give me the same shape, right? It just doesn't matter, right? So and I think that's like it was mind blowing for me when I first saw that this is possible. Because before that I was like, okay, how I'm going to design my components that I have like data layer outmost, right, and do this, right? And now I don't have to. I just have to see like where are these sources, and I can just mimic with a modular resolution where it actually what it should do, and that's great, right? I mean, we don't have yet Lightning, base Lightning components off platform, but that may come to make it even better.
Would be very good, very good. Any other questions for René, guys?
Silence.
Silence. Stunned silence.
I think that challenge was virtual events.
Yeah, that's sort of how it happens. Very good. I'm very interested in how as you call it, I'm going to start calling it SADI as well, because that's something I was always interested in, how accessibility can be tested. But it's great that Alba started this. So I always thought that it's down to us to keep testing stuff, but that's fantastic. And it uses the industry standard tool, the Axe tool that you're talking about. That's what it uses, correct?
Yes, X. It's using X under the hood. It's a basic reason, you can run WebDriver tests, just unit tests, like on the different stages, like integration unit testing and so forth. And they build like really the integration, the abstraction layer on top of that, which is super cool. It's like, and it's really like you add a dependency to your project and add to your LWC test is accessible, right? So what Alba did is she really expanded on the unit test and wrote really a dedicated test for is accessible, which is like really, really good. It's just also more work, but you don't have to. The only important thing is you have to identify what are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different UI states that my component has, and then just run to be accessible against the whole element, right? What I sometimes forget is to add an alt tag to an image, right? But that describes to people who have a vision impairment what that image is that they can see, right? So it's something that you find on so many websites that they forgot like these minor things, and if you can catch it during development and not during Q&A, I think that's like a super win.
Very good. Okay, guys. So thanks very much, René, for that. If you have any questions for René, you can reach out to him on Twitter. I think we have his Twitter handle on the event page. The only note is again that, of course, Virtual Dreamforce is happening in November. We are planning an event after that, a virtual meetup, and I would encourage people to think about stuff they would like to talk about. It could be a big Q&A session. It could be where people talk about what they saw. And I know that people like Jürgen and Letterkenny Group and other people are planning their own events around the time. So keep an eye out for those in the Trailblazer community groups. And with that, thanks very much. Thanks very much, René. I really appreciate the time. It's great to have you in front of the group.
Yeah, I always wanted to come physically, like over the last 4 years, and I never made it, but now I'm here. So
very good. Dan, do you have a question?
No, just wanted to say thank you so much, René. Thank you. It's great.
Yeah. And if you have any questions, and Barry has my email address. No worries. I'm happy to answer emails. Not for those who watch the recording, because that may be 500,000, so that may be a bit different. But if you know Barry, he has my email address. Just that's totally fine. Or DM me on Twitter. I'm here and usually really responsive. So anytime, here to help.
Excellent, guys. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much, René. I really appreciate the time. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you again soon.
Cool. Happy day. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Cheers all.
Cheers, guys.